Thomas Banyakua used to always say, everyone in this room has an ancestry that is much deeper and richly grounded in tribal traditions than as citizens of modern nation states. We existed as humankind on this planet in tribal nations for thousands of years before we became members of modern nation states and citizens of those nation states. And if you think about it, the challenge we face today is that we have disconnected our culture and our life ways from the ecological and biological diversity from which our identities, our material culture, our symbolic culture, our behavioral features of who we are emerged. I like to say that being indigenous is identifying oneself as a unique person, as a part of a people that has a very long relationship in this kind of symbiotic relationship between people and place. The biggest challenge we face today is that we've separated culture, technology, tools from the earth, and I think the way that we have to understand the protection of the biological diversity of the planet is reconnecting our human diversity to that biological and ecological diversity. The reason that tribal people are so incredibly diverse, so incredibly unique, is because they didn't go to a supermarket or a shopping mall to buy their culture. They found their culture emergent out of a seascape or a landscape where they had a very long history. And I think that's the beauty of indigenous people today. And I think the threats we face are perilous to the entire planet if we don't reconnect culture and nature. That's kind of one of those Western dichotomies we've got to disabuse ourselves of. I think it's one of the most miseducative dichotomies on Western thinking, that somehow culture should exist autonomously from nature. No. In fact, through most of our human history, our cultures were literally emergent out of the landscapes and seascapes we called home. I'm of the opinion now, and I mean, I know that there's a great need for large institutional realignment and a revisioning, really, a transformative kind of movement that has to happen if we're going to avoid a lot of really unpleasant things, not just for ourselves, but for all of our, non-human relatives we share this planet with. And I'm of the opinion that the way that we start this change is within communities, within families. I think increasingly indigenous people are playing leadership roles in trying to model and envision what a sustainable human community would look like. It's a part of our traditions. We have people who've lived roughly in the same place, the same landscapes and seascapes for tens of thousands of years. They've done so quite sustainably. Now they have all these external pressures on them that are trying to push them into something else, a different way, a better way of living. Maybe it's that idea of progress that they should tie into. And I would suggest to you that what we really have now is the opportunity to start modeling in our everyday activities the food we eat, the institutional arrangements that we make for families, for communities, for our tribal nations, the economic kind of relationships we engage in, that all of these things can, in fact, be quite positive. And in fact, I would argue that right now we're at the point to where we sort of know what we need to do, but we've come up against this incredible wall, this separation between knowing and doing. Where do we live? Let's take a moment and just look around us and ask, where do we live? How are we living? Is this what we call fulfillment? Is this what we call satisfaction? I think that, one of the opportunities we have now, and I think indigenous voices are going to be prominent in this, is to step up. And even within our own nations, where we have issues of this sort of colonial co-optation of mindsets and traditions. And I think we have the opportunity, those of us who can recollect and call on older traditions, to step forward and say, here's what we can do. It is easy to have those days when you kind of look around and you go, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? What's happening here? And I think that sense is real. I think it's palpable. I think that we should not estimate the fact that all the major institutions, education, politics, economics, even institutionalized religion to a certain extent, all of these major social institutions are built on a whole set of values, beliefs, principles that are other than what I'm talking about. So, to kind of use an analogy, it'd be like taking this immense structure that was built based on the premise of, well, we're going to heat and cool this with all of this, carbon energy. We'll have central air. We'll have central heat. We don't need windows that open anymore. And to take a building like that and say, I know what, we're going to retrofit that and make that green. Wow, you are? You're going to have some hard work ahead of you. And I think that's where we are now. That's that separation, I say, between knowing and doing. I think a lot of people right now, at one level, sort of know that this isn't working. They know they can start to envision what they'd like to see a life for their children and their grandchildren to be like. But we're in the middle of these systems that have such sunk investment in the continuation of these systems that we're currently, embedded in, that it is very, very difficult to figure out how are we going to change those. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I think it's going to be hard work. I think it's going to be tremendously hard work. And so I really identify, with that frustration. Most of my work for the last 10 years now has been on climate change. And the problem with talking to people about climate change, when you really start describing where it looks like we're headed, a lot of people just shut down and they go like, oh my God. It's, what are we going to do now? I guess, what can we do? And a fatalism, a kind of a fatalism. And I think that's a danger. Indigenous knowledge at its most fundamental level is a non-anthropocentric knowledge. It's a knowledge that is emergent out of an interaction of these co-producers of our knowledge, the plants, the animals, the wind, the water, that, as Warren Lyons says, in our native languages, we didn't have a word for resources. We didn't think of nature as resources. We had words that in their cognates that we used recognized those plants, the animals, the wind, the water, the earth itself as relatives. And if we pay attention, if we respect those relatives, they teach us something about how to be better human beings. So that's the first point. If you're going to do traditional ecological knowledge, you're going to have to step back from the notion that we're in charge. It's all about us. We're going to save the planet. So when I use that term indigenous knowledge, what I'm invoking is a very different knowledge system. It's a knowledge system that's not made by us and all about us. It's a knowledge system that is a cooperative production of what we can learn from the landscapes and the seascapes that we're a part of, and taking that very seriously. So that's number one. Number two, when we take that position, then it leads us to the next realization, and that is that one of the problems with this sort of prevailing notions of world history, Western notions of world historical movements, and even the idea of progress, and even this notion we invoke of sort of using technology as the benchmark of progress, that this sort of leads to this notion that somehow progress is when we all can adopt the latest and fastest and slickest technology. And I would argue that's a very dangerous idea, that the way, and this is what traditional ecological knowledges tell us, we shouldn't all live in adobe houses. We shouldn't all live in wood frame houses. We shouldn't all live in grass lodges. Some should live in adobe houses. Some should live in wood frame houses. Some should live in houses where all you really need is a roof with removable walls, which is what wickiups and arbors were for people. We could do so much innovation in the area of housing if we are reimagined in some very creative ways how those spaces that we choose to live in. And so the second part of TEK in my view is that we disabuse ourselves of this knowledge again that sort of technology functions independent of landscapes, of seascapes, of environments, of ecosystems. But technologies ought to literally be emergent out of this interaction and understanding between a people and a place. Now, there have been people who've been onto this for a long time. People who are talking about permaculture experiments today, people who are talking about appropriate technology. That's indigenous. Exactly. Livability, that is indigenous. That would be a part of traditional ecological knowledge. That's the way we've always done it. The third part that I think is critical in understanding traditional ecological knowledge is it really is based on this transfer of intergenerational knowledge over long periods of time. And I don't think people should approach traditional ecological knowledge as, oh, we're going to go out and collect all of this traditional ecological knowledge. No, what we're asking you to do is respect people and place. Let's move from this sort of paradigm of going out and collecting and move to a model of respecting knowledges and people and place, and then seeing how, we can enrich that, how we can draw on that so that we can live, in a more life-enhancing manner. Here's where we begin, and we'll never begin anywhere else. The earth is sacred. It's living. It's a spiritual reality. That's non-negotiable. We don't argue about it. If you're going to work with us, you're going to have to understand that's where we begin. I think the power of the Western worldview and this notion of civilization is that it's powerful because the people that adhere to it believe they have the one best way for all of the planet to be organized and a way to live. I can't think of a more hubris-ridden idea. And again, let me counterpoint that to what we were talking about earlier, indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge would say there's no one best way. How you live depends on where you live, who you are, what your traditions are. We've got to restore that biological and cultural diversity. I think that Western ego is so deeply immersed that this becomes the source in many ways for some of the deepest sort of psychic and psychological and social psychological problems we see modern man confronted with.